Archivist Dr. Helen Morrison carefully examined the contents of the donated collection that had arrived at the Chicago Historical Society that morning. The materials came from the estate of retired photographer Vincent Castellano, whose family had operated one of Chicago's most prestigious wedding photography studios from 1915 to 1968. The collection contained thousands of wedding photographs spanning 5 decades of Chicago's social history. Among the meticulously preserved images, one photograph immediately drew Morrison's attention. The formal wedding portrait, dated June 12, 1920, showed what appeared to be a typical upper-class wedding ceremony of the post-World War I era. The image radiated the optimism and celebration characteristic of the Roaring Twenties, when American society was eagerly embracing prosperity and modernity after the hardships of war. The photograph depicted a large wedding party arranged on the steps of St. James Cathedral, one of Chicago's most fashionable churches. The groom, a handsome man in his late 20s, wore a perfectly tailored morning coat with striped trousers and white gloves. His bride appeared to be in her early 20s, dressed in an elaborate silk wedding gown with intricate beadwork and a cathedral-length train. 6 bridesmaids in pale lavender dresses flanked the couple, their faces glowing with genuine happiness and excitement. An equal number of groomsmen in matching mourning coats completed the formal arrangement, all displaying the confident smiles of young men celebrating their friend's good fortune. The entire wedding party seemed to embody the joy and optimism of the era. However, when Morrison examined the photograph more closely with her professional magnifying equipment, she noticed something deeply unsettling about the bride's facial expression that seemed completely at odds with the celebratory atmosphere captured in the rest of the image. Morrison adjusted her desk lamp and focused her magnifying glass on the bride's face, expecting to see the radiant joy typical of wedding photography from the 1920s. Instead, she discovered an expression so profoundly disturbing that it made her stomach tighten with unease. While the bride's mouth was arranged in what appeared to be a smile from a distance, closer examination revealed that her expression was a masterpiece of deception. Her lips were curved upward in the socially expected manner, but the smile never reached her eyes. Instead, her eyes conveyed an emotion that was completely incompatible with wedding joy. They showed unmistakable terror. The bride's eyes were wide with fear, the whites clearly visible around her dark irises in a way that suggested she was experiencing genuine panic. Her pupils were dilated with stress, and there was a haunted quality to her gaze that spoke of someone confronting something horrifying. Most disturbing of all, she wasn't looking at the camera or her new husband. Her terrified gaze was fixed on something beyond the photographer, as if she were staring at an approaching threat. The contrast between her forced smile and her terrified eyes created an expression of such profound distress that Morrison felt she was looking at someone trapped in a nightmare while being forced to pretend everything was wonderful. The bride's carefully applied makeup couldn't disguise the pallor of her skin or the subtle tremor that seemed to affect her entire face. Morrison had examined thousands of wedding photographs throughout her career, but she had never encountered such a jarring disconnect between expected joy and apparent terror. The bride's expression suggested she was being forced to participate in her own wedding while experiencing genuine fear about something that the other wedding party members seemed completely unaware of. Morrison began researching the historical context of the 1920 wedding photograph by examining the Castellano family's business records, which revealed that the wedding had been photographed for the Harrison-Pemberton wedding, involving 2 of Chicago's most prominent families during the post-war economic boom. James Harrison was identified as the heir to Harrison Manufacturing, a company that had prospered during World War I by producing military supplies. The bride, Catherine Pemberton, was the daughter of Judge William Pemberton, a respected federal judge. The wedding had been extensively covered in Chicago's society pages as the social event of the season. However, Morrison's research revealed troubling details about the circumstances surrounding the wedding. The engagement had been announced only 3 months before the ceremony, an unusually short courtship period for families of their social standing. Contemporary social conventions typically involved engagement periods of a year or more. More concerning were the newspaper accounts of the wedding itself. While the coverage emphasized the ceremony's grandeur and the family's social prominence, Several society columnists made oblique references to the bride's unusual behavior during the festivities. One columnist noted that Miss Pemberton appeared somewhat overwhelmed by the magnitude of the occasion, while another mentioned that she had seemed understandably nervous about her new responsibilities. Most intriguingly, Morrison discovered a brief mention in the Chicago Tribune Society section from the day after the wedding. The bride appeared pale during the ceremony and required assistance from her attendants during the photography session. This reference to Catherine needing help during what should have been a routine photo session suggested that her distress had been noticeable to contemporary observers. Further investigation revealed that Catherine had returned from Vassar College in late 1919, 7 months before her wedding, withdrawing from her studies for personal reasons. The combination of her abbreviated education, rushed engagement, and apparent distress during the wedding suggested circumstances that warranted deeper investigation. Morrison expanded her research to include genealogical records and family documents housed in Chicago's municipal archives. Her investigation revealed increasingly troubling details about Catherine Pemberton's circumstances leading up to her 1920 wedding. Judge Pemberton's personal papers, donated to the Chicago Bar Association's historical collection, contained correspondence that provided crucial insights into his daughter's situation. In a letter to his brother dated March 1920, Judge Pemberton had written, "Catherine's circumstances have become untenable. The Harrison family has shown remarkable understanding of her predicament, and James appears genuinely committed to providing her with the protection she desperately needs." The cryptic language suggested family concerns that went beyond typical parental matchmaking. Additional correspondence revealed that Catherine had been living in virtual seclusion at the family's Lake Forest estate following her return from college, rarely appearing in public or participating in the social activities appropriate for a young woman of her position. Most revealing was a letter from Catherine's mother to her sister, dated April 1920. "We pray daily that marriage will provide Catherine with the sanctuary she requires to escape her current torment. James Harrison is an honorable man who comprehends the gravity of her situation and has pledged to shield her from further harm. His willingness to accept such responsibility demonstrates remarkable character." The correspondence consistently referenced Catherine's need for protection, sanctuary, and shielding from harm, language that suggested she was fleeing from some form of serious threat or danger. The urgency of the wedding arrangements and the repeated emphasis on James Harrison's willingness to accept responsibility indicated that Catherine's marriage was motivated by desperation rather than romance. Morrison's investigation also revealed that the Pemberton family had hired private security guards for their Lake Forest estate beginning in late 1919, coinciding with Catherine's return from college. This extraordinary security measure for a judge's family suggested genuine concerns about Catherine's physical safety. Morrison's breakthrough came when she accessed police records from the Chicago Police Department's historical archives. Her research revealed that Catherine Pemberton had been the victim of persistent stalking and intimidation by a man named Vincent Torino, who had developed an obsessive fixation on her during her time at Vassar College. Torino had been a groundskeeper at Vassar who had reportedly become infatuated with Catherine after encountering her during her morning walks around campus. His behavior had escalated from inappropriate comments to following her, leaving unwanted gifts, and eventually making explicit threats about what he would do if she ever rejected his advances or attempted to escape his attention. When Catherine had reported Torino's behavior to college authorities in late 1919, he had been immediately dismissed from his position. However, rather than ending his obsession, the termination had intensified his fixation on Catherine. He had followed her from Connecticut to Chicago, continuing his campaign of harassment and intimidation with increasing boldness and violence. Police records documented multiple incidents throughout early 1920 where Torino had been spotted near the Pemberton family estate, attempting to approach Catherine during her brief public appearances and leaving threatening messages that promised he would never allow her to belong to another man. The threats had escalated to include detailed descriptions of violence he would inflict on both Catherine and anyone who attempted to protect her. Judge Pemberton had used his legal connections to obtain restraining orders and increase police patrols around the family's properties, but Torino had proven remarkably adept at evading law enforcement while continuing his harassment campaign. The police records revealed that he had specifically threatened to disrupt Catherine's wedding, promising that he would never allow her to marry another man. Most chillingly, the record showed that Torino had been spotted in the vicinity of St. James Cathedral on the morning of June 12, 1920, the day of Catherine's wedding to James Harrison. Morrison's investigation revealed that Catherine's terrified expression during the wedding photography had been a direct response to spotting Vincent Torino among the crowd of spectators gathered outside St. James Cathedral. Police reports from June 12, 1920, documented that Torino had positioned himself across the street from the church, making eye contact with Catherine and drawing his finger across his throat in a slashing motion when she emerged for the formal photography session. Detective Michael O'Brien's incident report described the scene. Suspect Vincent Torino was observed making threatening gestures toward the bride during the wedding photography. When uniformed officers approached his position, suspect fled on foot through nearby alleyways. Bride appeared to be in extreme distress upon observing suspect's presence and required assistance from wedding party members to complete photography session. The police report explained why Catherine had needed assistance from her attendants during the photo session, as mentioned in the newspaper coverage. She had been paralyzed with terror upon seeing her stalker, requiring physical support to remain standing while the photographer captured the formal wedding portraits. Morrison discovered that the wedding reception at the Palmer House Hotel had been conducted under extraordinary security measures, with Chicago police providing discreet protection throughout the event. James Harrison had been briefed about the threat against his new wife and had arranged for additional private security guards to supplement the police presence. Catherine's terror during the photograph wasn't pre-wedding nerves or reluctance about marriage. It was the genuine fear of a young woman who had just seen her dangerous stalker positioning himself to carry out his threats. Her forced smile represented desperate courage, attempting to maintain normal appearances while confronting a threat that could turn deadly at any moment. The wedding photograph had captured the exact moment when Catherine spotted Torino across the street, creating a permanent record of her transition from relative safety inside the cathedral to the terrifying realization that her tormentor had found her even on what should have been the most protected day of her life. Morrison's research into police records revealed that Vincent Torino's obsession with Catherine had not ended with her marriage. Throughout the summer and fall of 1920, he had continued his campaign of stalking and intimidation, now directed at both Catherine and her new husband. Detective O'Brien's reports documented a series of increasingly dangerous incidents. Torino had been spotted outside the Harrison family's Chicago mansion, had followed Catherine during her supervised shopping trips, and had sent threatening letters to both Catherine and James promising that their marriage would not protect them from his plans. The harassment had escalated to acts of vandalism and property destruction. Torino had broken windows at the Harrison residence, damaged their automobile, and left dead animals on their doorstep, all accompanied by notes threatening more serious violence if Catherine continued to refuse his demands for a private meeting. Most disturbing were Torino's detailed threats about what he intended to do to James Harrison. The letters, preserved in police evidence files, described elaborate plans for kidnapping and torturing Catherine's husband as punishment for stealing what Torino considered his rightful possession. The threats revealed a completely deranged individual whose obsession had evolved into violent fantasies involving both victims. James Harrison had hired a team of private investigators and security personnel to protect his wife, but Torino had proven remarkably skilled at evading detection while continuing his reign of terror. The psychological toll on Catherine had been devastating. She had become virtually housebound, afraid to venture outside even with protection. The police investigation had intensified throughout late 1920, with Detective O'Brien coordinating with federal authorities who had become involved due to Torino's interstate stalking activities. However, despite extensive manhunts and surveillance operations, Torino had continued to evade capture while escalating his threats and maintaining his terrifying presence in the Harrisons' lives. Morrison's research revealed that the stalking campaign had reached its climax in December 1920, when Vincent Torino had made his final desperate attempt to claim Catherine. Police records documented a violent home invasion at the Harrison mansion that had nearly resulted in multiple deaths. Detective O'Brien's detailed report described how Torino had broken into the Harrison residence on the evening of December 15, 1920, armed with a knife and a detailed plan for kidnapping Catherine. He had disabled the exterior lighting and circumvented the security measures, gaining entry through a second-floor window while the family was having dinner downstairs. James Harrison had heard unusual sounds from upstairs and had investigated, encountering Torino in the hallway outside Catherine's bedroom. The ensuing struggle had been violent and prolonged, with Torino attempting to stab Harrison while screaming about his intention to take Catherine away from the man who had stolen her. Catherine's testimony, preserved in court records, described hearing the fight and finding both men injured and bleeding in the hallway. Torino had turned on her with the knife, declaring that if he couldn't have her, he would ensure that no one could. James Harrison, despite his injuries, had managed to tackle Torino and prevent him from reaching Catherine. The arrival of police, alerted by neighbors who had heard the commotion, had finally ended Torino's reign of terror. He had been arrested, charged with attempted murder, breaking and entering, and stalking, and was ultimately sentenced to 20 years in prison. The judge had noted the extraordinary nature of the case and the persistent danger Torino had posed to his victims. Catherine's nightmare had finally ended, but the psychological damage from months of terror had been profound. Medical records showed that she had required extensive treatment for trauma and anxiety and had never fully recovered from the fear that had dominated the first year of her marriage. Morrison's investigation into Catherine's life following Vincent Torino's arrest revealed a gradual but incomplete recovery from the trauma that had defined the early years of her marriage. Medical records from Chicago physicians showed that Catherine had suffered from persistent anxiety, insomnia, and agoraphobia, symptoms that modern medicine would recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Edmund Whitmore, the Harrison family physician, had documented Catherine's struggle to return to normal social life following Torino's imprisonment. His notes described her as a young woman whose natural vivacity has been severely damaged by prolonged terror. She startles at unexpected sounds, avoids crowds, and requires constant reassurance about her personal safety. James Harrison had proven to be an exceptionally supportive and understanding husband throughout Catherine's recovery. Business associates noted his dedication to his wife's healing, including his decision to relocate their primary residence to a more secure estate in Lake Forest and his willingness to decline social invitations that might trigger Catherine's anxiety. The couple's marriage, which had begun as a protective arrangement during Catherine's crisis, had evolved into a genuinely loving partnership. Their correspondence, preserved in family papers, showed deep affection and mutual respect that had developed through their shared ordeal. James had written to his brother in 1922, "Catherine's courage during those terrible months revealed a strength of character that I find inspiring. Our marriage may have begun under extraordinary circumstances, but it has become the greatest blessing of my life." Catherine's recovery had been aided by her involvement in charitable work supporting other crime victims, particularly women who had experienced stalking or domestic violence. She had become a quiet advocate for legal reforms to strengthen protection for stalking victims, using her family's social influence to support legislative changes. However, the psychological scars had never completely healed. Family members noted that Catherine remained vigilant and easily frightened throughout her life, always checking locks multiple times and preferring smaller social gatherings to large public events that reminded her of the vulnerability she had experienced. Morrison's comprehensive investigation had transformed the 1920 wedding photograph from a seemingly joyful celebration into a powerful historical document, illustrating the reality of stalking and domestic terrorism in an era when such crimes were poorly understood and inadequately addressed by law enforcement. Her research findings were compiled into a detailed case study that Morrison presented to the American Association of Archivists, demonstrating how visual evidence could reveal hidden stories of crime and victimization within seemingly conventional historical documents. The case became a model for interdisciplinary research combining archival investigation with criminal justice history. Morrison's work also contributed to broader understanding of how stalking victims coped with persistent threats during the 1920s, when legal protections were minimal and social understanding of such crimes was limited. Catherine's story illustrated the courage required to maintain normal appearances while living under constant threat, and the importance of supportive family and community networks in helping victims survive prolonged campaigns of intimidation. The research led to contact with the Harrison family descendants, who had known about Vincent Torino but had never fully understood the extent of Catherine's terror or the remarkable courage she had displayed throughout her ordeal. The family expressed gratitude that Catherine's strength and resilience were finally being recognized and documented for historical preservation. The 1920 wedding photograph now serves as the centerpiece of an exhibition at the Chicago Historical Society focusing on crime victims' experiences in early 20th century America. The display includes contemporary police reports, medical records, and legal documents that provide context for understanding Catherine's terrified expression during what should have been the happiest day of her life. Catherine Harrison's story serves as a reminder that behind formal historical photographs often lie complex human experiences of courage, survival, and resilience. Her terrified smile represents not weakness, but extraordinary bravery, the determination to go forward with her life and find happiness despite ongoing threats from someone who sought to destroy her future through fear and violence.